Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of the RD2RD Live Show, and we're talking about cookbook publishing, really the do's and don'ts and basics for those of you who have a cookbook or idea or are curious about how dietitians get cookbook deals. So we have our special guest today is Sally Eckes, and she is a literary agent, represents not just dietitians, but many in the culinary space, and has a good background in securing book deals and really that whole behind the scenes of what it takes to pitch your idea, what does a good proposal look like, and of course, all about that whole money and getting paid and contracts. So this is a huge topic, and we only have a limited amount of time together today. So we are absolutely looking for your questions in the chat. Go ahead, and if something comes up, I'm going to be keeping a close eye on those, so you can pop in and we'll take those questions as they come. And then we're going to be kind of walking through some real world examples, kind of start to finish, as well as diving into some of those, as I mentioned, do's and don'ts, sticking points that maybe you wouldn't know about if you hadn't been through the process. So, Sally, thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me, Megan. I love talking all the fun things, book deals, transparency, how it happens, why you should do it, why you shouldn't do it. So I'm excited to dive in.
Yes to all of those things.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, as we always start the show, telling us, getting a little bit of background about you. Obviously, you're not a registered dietitian, so giving us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is a little bit in the health space, more on the mental health side. So I, in my previous career, before I did literary agenting, I was working on an inpatient mental health unit at a local hospital in the where I went to college. So I went to school for sociology and psychology, and I was on the path to social work, working in an acute setting in Ithaca, New York. And loved that work, but also was very young, and I am a very empathetic person, and it was hard. So I took a step back after, a life event, which is oftentimes a breakup, which it was. I moved back home to Western Massachusetts, and I started helping out my mom, Lisa, at our company, then called the Lisa Eckes Group. So we are a full-service culinary agency specializing in talent representation and literary representation. And literary is the capacity in which we'll talk about here today. So I started helping out at the agency in what I thought would be just a little stepping stone in my career to sort of getting back on my feet and going for my master's in social work. And turns out I was sort of informally training for this career my whole life. I loved working at the agency. I loved the matchmaking between representing authors and their ideas to publishers. And so a few years into that work, we started talking about whether or not this would be my career and a succession plan. And so recently, our agency just celebrated 40 years in business, Lisa founding the company 40 years ago, and a formal rebrand from the Lisa Eckes Group to the Eckes Group. So an outward expression of that succession that we've been working on now for about 13 years.
Wow.
So it's a little bit of background on me. And then on a personal note, I'm also a childhood cancer survivor. And so my dedication to understanding the connection between what we put in our bodies and how that impacts our health is just personally really important to me. And so on my author list professionally, I work with registered dietitians, I work with food writers, food bloggers, influencers, chefs, and culinary historians, and the more health and wellness side of our agency representation is oftentimes on my personal author list, because it's a really important connection for me, and to support that work professionally in book printed form is a passion of mine.
Nice. That I liked your personal note there, the connection to nutrition, and I think many of us have a personal connection, right,
Absolutely,
to the work that we do. And I also find it interesting that you went into the family business, right? Not thinking that, that might be where you ended up, but Obviously, it's work that excites you and really has a great path. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
so before we dive into what does a literary agent do, some of the intricacies of proposals, which I'm sure you are a pro at in pitching, I want to just kind of take a step back and start out with, if writing a cookbook, publishing, being a published author is a goal for, you listening in as a dietitian, tell us yes in the comments if that is you. What are some of the benefits besides, we all think we're going to make, earn a ton of money, maybe selling our cookbooks, maybe some of the less known benefits of being an author, and then maybe we can talk about, some of those misconceptions.
Yeah, absolutely. So even the best book deals out there, I often say a book is like a big, beautiful business card. It's not a retirement plan. So even the best advances, and we'll talk about what an advance is and how authors get paid, it's a very big investment, both in your time and often financially. And so certainly a good and important reason to write a book is because you would like to make money off of that book. And the reality of how to do that takes a tremendous amount of hard work. So financial motivation is a great motivator, but the reality of how those finances break down, what we can get into. Other good reasons, though, particularly for RDs, is that a book is a big, beautiful business card. So it is that new, shiny thing that you can utilize in the best sense of the word to be an entree to other important relationships and introductions. So, for example, maybe you have a passion for the connection between fruits and vegetables and what that does with our body. And so you decide, for a variety of reasons, you're going to write a book about, the big book of fruit. And you can call your local media stations, whether it's television or radio, and build a relationship because you have a new thing to say, hey, I have this new thing I'm promoting. Would you have me on to talk about? And then all of a sudden you can deliver your messages about, why strawberries are so good for us. I got strawberries on the mind because I'm in Massachusetts and I can feel spring coming. So I'm very excited for strawberry season, as is my daughter. So it's this calling card to create new doors and open new doors. If you do speaking engagements, it's a wonderful way to offer something as part of your speaking package and as part of that relationship. Sometimes you build the book into your speaker's fee, sometimes you don't. There's pros and cons to doing it, but it's that new entity that can open new doors. And it's also a way to package your content, package your message, package your material between two covers. So a really important question when people pitch me, or in general, if people are thinking, I think I want to write a book, but I don't know for sure, ask yourself, why between two covers? Why printed form? Why does the content have to be delivered in this way rather than for a speaking engagement or in a quick 5-minute spot on your local television network or on a blog post or in a webcast? If there's a good reason that content needs to live on the page, maybe it's a reference for patients, maybe it's a reference for your clients, then that can sort of lead to the decision of, yes, a cookbook or a book makes sense for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so good, so good. I think you mentioned that, getting exposure of having a book as a stepping stone to getting some other opportunities. And before I ask you kind of about the misconceptions, I think there's a lot of different ways to go about kind of publishing a book. And I'm on a lot of different, groups with other dietitians, and I hear, oh, I was, approached by a certain publisher to write this book, right? And
yes.
Maybe the pay's not very good, or I have a short deadline, versus you having a book idea that you're really trying to pitch. Can you kind of talk us through all the different ways these are a few different common ways this idea kind of gets to the publisher? I'm not sure if my question is super clear.
Yeah, totally. Okay. I get at least an email a week from somebody saying, I've been approached by a publisher, the deadline's crazy turnaround, I don't think the pay is very good, but I want to do it, what should I do? And I can tell you offline, I can probably name who those publishers are, because they're doing a really good job at what they do, which is search for people writing about content they're looking for experts on and cranking out material in printed book form quickly. That being said, that model is is right sometimes for your specific needs and goals. But writing a book is a lot of work, and testing recipes and meeting deadlines is a tremendous undertaking. And so it's really important to consider, what is your primary motivation? What is the publisher that's approaching you's primary motivation? And do those goals align? And it's okay to negotiate, and it's okay to say no, and it's okay to say yes, and here are the parameters in which I can take this on in my life. But book deals come about in a couple different ways. Sometimes somebody will be approached directly by a publisher, and you may decide to seek having a lawyer review a contract or offer, doing a consult with an agent, or seeking full-on agent representation to take over that negotiation for you. Sometimes even our clients are approached directly because they're putting out content online, and publishers are looking for experts, and so they're approached and they say, okay, great, yeah, I'm thinking about writing a book, and copy in my agent. Oftentimes, though, in the traditional publishing path, with the majority of the traditional publishers that are out there, it's cookbooks in particular are sold off of book proposals. So you, the RD, are coming up with, here's what my idea is, and here's essentially the business plan for my idea and why you should, buy into my idea, and here are all the amazing things I'm going to do with this idea to promote it. Here's what the idea is. Here's the content. We could talk about what goes into a book proposal. But in traditional publishing, oftentimes book deals come to be when an author works on a concept, writes the book proposal, and nonfiction books are sold off of a proposal, not a full manuscript, which is different in fiction publishing, where you might write the full manuscript and send sample pages to an agent or to a publisher.
Okay.
And just as a point of reference too for our agency, we do deals both ways. So I'd say 60-ish% of the deals we do are us representing the author that has a full proposal. So I'm sending out the proposal to different editors that I think would be interested. Mm-hmm. But then 40-ish% of deals are when publishers come to me and say, hey, I'm really looking for an expert to write a book all about, the health benefits of mushrooms. Do you know anybody? And I'm like, yes, our business has been in, the culinary space for 40 years. We've got connections, and I might either have that client on my roster already or go out and find somebody because, we are well connected in the space, and rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah. And okay. I really appreciated that you kind of mentioned a few things about kind of the proposal, and you mentioned working with an agent and getting that proposal. And we're going to kind of come back a little bit to
Sure.
the concept of, what does an agent do and how does that work? So I kind of want to first stop and do another comparison of kind of self-publishing versus traditional publishing. Because I think people throw out the word, cookbook publishing, and for the purposes of today, making sure people understand we're really talking about more of a traditionally published book,
yes.
Like getting a publisher that's going to give you a contract and you're going to get, paid for that. So I think maybe you could probably hint a little bit to maybe the differences in contract
Sure.
and payment, and you went back to some of the pros and cons if you're trying to get exposure. Maybe we can kind of loop a little bit of that in here.
Yes. So for today's purposes, we're talking about traditional publishing, which is when a publisher offers a book contract, including an advance paid to the author to write the project. If you work with an agent, they'll be operating on a commission model, and we can talk about that. For self-publishing, 10, 15 plus years ago, it was sort of like the last resort option. If you couldn't get published, it was sort of a dirty word, but when I entered the industry, there was this big shift going on where a lot of people were putting content online, a lot of food bloggers, a lot of RDs, a lot of social media influencers, and they were like, I want to totally control this process. I know exactly what I want my book to look and feel like, and hey, I'm going to back the whole thing because I know I'm going to make a lot more money knowing that I can sell, 5,000 copies or 10,000 copies of this book, and I want a higher percentage of those profits. So I'm going to self-publish. Generally speaking, there are three main considerations that I think are high level. Should I custom or self-publish versus traditionally publish? And I use custom and self-publish essentially interchangeably. And those three considerations are money. Do you want to be paid something, or do you want to outlay all the money? And the nuances of how that money is handled in each path is different, but generally speaking, do you want to back the book or do you want to be backed? And there are reasons to back the book, and there are reasons to be backed. Second is the broad term of control. Do you want to decide everything about how your book is going to look and feel, like down to trim size and paper quality? Or do you want to say, hey, publisher, you have a lot of experience putting saleable books together. I want to weigh in on what the paper is going to be like, but you probably should ultimately decide. And there are pros and cons to yesing both of those options. And then the third one is distribution. So in custom publishing, yes, your book can be available online, but ultimately you are your bookseller. And in traditional publishing, your publisher is going to have those distribution relationships in place. Are those the three end-all, be-all reasons to go one path or the other? No, but those three conversations will ultimately lead you down one path over the other, over some of the other decisions to make along the way.
Yeah, no, that really does, I think, help to make sure people know we're talking really that traditional publisher-published book here today. And so I
forgot to mention one thing really quick that's super important for anybody that's listening that's been approached by a publisher, in terms of like pitfalls or misconceptions to highlight today, which is that I can often think about the publishers that are doing that outreach, and there's one, maybe even two, that operate in sort of a non-traditional publishing model in that they're offering contracts as a work for hire rather than a traditional authorship where you are receiving royalties. So a key question, if anybody listening today has been approached by a publisher, is the offer a work for hire or is it a true authorship? And one way to determine that is to see who owns the copyright to the material. And I will just leave that out in the ether for people to go back to their inbox and follow up on.
Absolutely, that is a very important nugget there. And I actually think, you mentioned, people reach out to you. Eckes Group I became aware of after I had a contract come to me for kind of talent work of sorts, and I needed someone with more experience to take a look at it and walk me through and make sure that some of that negotiation, and I'm so glad that it was you guys that could help me, definitely put me in a lot better spot. So I think we can talk about, we'll talk more about Eckes Group and different work, but
yeah.
But let's kind of go through this whole process of, okay, so if I want to publish a cookbook, right? If I'm working with a publisher, so what are these big bucket steps in the process of, okay, I have this idea, and you mentioned this thing called a book proposal, which is kind of like a business plan for my book. And what are the steps involved? So like, what am I supposed to do first? And then, big chunks, and we can break down some of those.
Sure. So the first step is to take your idea in your head and put it down on paper. And a great way to do that is to walk yourself through the book proposal process. And our website has guidelines that are available that would be comprehensive enough for any agent out there. So they're not specific to our agency or publishers we work with. And it walks you through what's the overview? Who are you? Your bio. What is press coverage that you've had? What's your platform? Your market and your proven track record reaching that market successfully. What are the different chapters and what's going to be in those chapters? What's a complete recipe list? Yes, it can change a little bit, but there's nuances to that. What's the competition like, right? And then sample material. So first step, where do I even begin? I say begin at the competition section. Just do some research as to what else is out there in this space. And what you're looking for is other content that's out there that's similar and doing well. Because if there's other stuff doing well out there, you're like, great, there's a market for my idea. And here's how I'm different, right? Here's what I'm putting forward. Here's what I'm proposing that's new and different, building off of other successful stuff. A very common red flag for me, seeing as I'm wearing my red flag headphones, sorry, I feel like I need to call out the fact that they're aggressively red and I'm like air traffic controlling over here. Is to say, like when I read proposals that say, there's never been a book like this published before. My first thought is, this is somebody who has no idea how publishing works. That's fine. A lot of people who enter traditional publishing begin at the ground level, but it means you haven't done your research, and it means you haven't really immersed yourself in learning how does publishing work, how do I get into it, and sort of how do I open that door. And a really helpful way to do that is to find other books that do a version, not replica, version of what you do, right? So we want to find other books that talk about the connection between what we put in our body and how it affects our physical well-being, right? Mm-hmm. But, and also, you have something a little bit different. You have a new twist, you have a new hook that builds off of that success and offers that new entity into the market. So that's the place to start. Once you have your book proposal, you query agents if you decide you want to work with an agent. And then so the path is somebody sends me a proposal, I love it, I sign them, we work on fine-tuning the proposal, I put a pitch together, I put a pub list together of publishers that I think would be interested, I pitch out the proposal, we negotiate the deal, you then have about 9 to 12 months to deliver your manuscript, then it's another year of production before it comes out, then the book comes out, and a whole new chapter for you, the author of work begins, which is like promoting and selling your book. And in both paths, traditional and self-publishing, you really need to be prepared to work your little off in order to sell that book.
Got it. I want to see those of you who are, listening, and if you have questions, she mentioned, you get an agent, or I would, from my perspective, I'm like, I just reach out to these, publishers and try to pitch my idea. And I think based on, some of the pre-work that I've done here, that's probably, as far as like a major publisher or some of these, I guess the ones, I don't want to say they're smaller publishers, but there's like this, I hear some of them brought up commonly in various groups. And I guess it's that quality, that grading of who you're trying to get your book published with. And if you're coming in, let's say, with a pretty large, following, do you have to have a really large audience to get that book deal? Like being realistic about who you pitch to, what are your odds? Do I need this literary agent? Like, how do you kind of decide, well, I'm going to call an agent. Am I worthy of an agent? I guess that's some of the things I would be thinking of. Maybe it's silly for me to even think about an agent. Does that make sense?
It does. Again, start with the book proposal, because the book proposal is going to ask you questions to reflect on, like, who's my audience? And that's everything from, of course, social media numbers, but like a lot more stuff, such as, do you have a clinical practice? And are you speaking somewhere? Are you on staff somewhere? Do you have relationships with high-profile doctors and other RDs that are going to support your book or blurb your book or write a forward? So it's like the whole package. What are my media relationships? Should you work with an agent? It's hard to land an agent, right? I think Diane Jacob from who's a wonderful resource in this industry about food writing. I think she says like 1% of queries land agents. That's a very small percentage. That being said, it's like exclusively what I do. So 100% of my representation is in this space. So I think it's about putting your best foot forward, and the proposal is a really great barometer for, are you ready for an agent? And I have conversations years before people formally pitch me, because we talk like this and we learn, I learn about somebody's platform, about their work, about their content. I follow them. And then eventually it kind of just feels like the right time. Mm-hmm. There's the science and the serendipity for how book deals come together. And they're both really profound components. One cannot work really without the other. A lot of it is about timing and being ready and knowing when you're ready, and not. Patience is a virtue too. If it has to be out next year, then it's probably a trend-based book, and then that's a specific type of publisher with a specific type of publishing experience. There are independent publishers and sort of smaller publishers, other than the big 4 or 5-ish, that their books look and feel a certain way. What that publishing program is, and it might make sense to fit into that program, to fit into 224 pages and a $14.95 price point. That might make sense. And then 2 years from now, it might make sense to go that one more level up. That's all part of sort of the strategy and the sounding board of what an agent can provide, or what our agency provides. I can speak for a handful of other agents I know that also provide that type of representation. But it really all depends. Like everything in the publishing space is sort of the brand of it depends on you, your unique scenario, where the industry is at the time, what people are looking for. And from an RD specific perspective, we are already then narrowing the bookshelf into health and wellness, into special diet, into nutrition. And so when you are looking at, the bookshelf, and then you're taking this section of the bookshelf, you really need to make a case for who you are, this idea, and why a book over everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think if you're building, as I'm thinking, if you're building your platform and you mention, various publishers are looking for experts, is there a way, how do you basically let people know, like, hey, I'm looking for a book deal without putting a giant sign that says, hey, I'm looking for a book deal, right? Is it just typically most of the time it happens? Because I do hear, people in, spaces that are perhaps pretty narrow in focus, where it's easy to go out and go, wow, these are the 5, people. Do you find that most people, it just happens kind of organically, or they're more, I guess, assertive about?
It really depends, right? Okay. I mean, once you're signed with us, we always have you in mind, whether or not we're formally pitching somebody for a concept or not. Sort of out in the greater ether space, I think it depends on sort of what you're putting forward in your professional portfolio. If you talk, it's networking, right? So I have a Facebook community called How to Be a Cookbook Author, very search term friendly. Anybody listening can request access. It's a place to learn and network. And there are other authors in there. There's RDs in there. There's bloggers, influencers. I'm in there. Like it's just about talking about being open and ready to the book writing process, but then also kind of showing that you're ready by, if I go to somebody's website and their work with me page says, here are the various ways you can work with me for literary inquiries, contact, whether it's your agent or you don't have an agent, but it's clear that you've thought about writing a book. That's an easy way to show this is something that's on my mind. This is a goal for me. And start putting ideas down on paper, right? Start putting your recipes together, and positioning yourself as an expert in your field.
Good. Well, I think just before we transition to kind of talking a little bit more about, money and that type of stuff, that whole idea of your pitch and your proposal as really that business plan for your book. And I think there's a question here about resources. I know you guys, and we'll talk about, you have a course on cookbook writing, and I know it has a huge section on that proposal part. And I haven't submitted a cookbook proposal, but I can say that in my own experience of doing pitches for various like startup contests or business accelerator type programs, when I've been forced to really lay things out in that way, there's so much that you learn and you get back. Even if you don't get selected, that feedback goes,
totally.
It's really helped me personally to really, from an expert, people on the outside, to say, oh, wow, yeah, I was missing that. And really to fine tune that proposal process. So I think really what I'm hearing you say, that's really that first place to start, especially if you want to publish a cookbook. Yes, we want to get into the message and what we're going to write, but as dietitians, we want to help. But in reality, we're selling something, and we have to understand that laying that proposal out is really selling that idea, and that might be uncomfortable. That might be where we feel a little less skilled, but that you can absolutely learn it. And I think with tools, especially from someone who's done it a lot, laying that process out, joining groups like you mentioned, that are broader than just dietitians too. I think
Absolutely.
we tend to only hang out with our own kind, and it's good to like broaden. Like me being around other business and founders is helpful that are not dietitians.
Absolutely. So a couple thoughts on that. The first is you don't have to show your proposal to anybody, right? So start writing the proposal, and if it's like lingering on your to-do list or stressing you out, you're not ready to write a book. Great, now you know. And then go back to it in 6 months and see if it feels different. You don't have to send the proposal to anybody. Or if it's like the most exciting thing you sit down to do every day, tap into that, right? Like follow your intuition. Side note, because I'm all about like super practical information, going back to how do you let people know, like if you're a dietitian, how do you let people know that you're available to write a book, or how do you dabble and like build in this space? Many authors that may or may not be required to deliver nutritional information for their book may or may not have the capabilities to do so. So if you are a dietitian and you can start to reach out and build relationships with other authors that are writing in the health and wellness space and offer your services from a nutritional information standpoint or nutritional analysis standpoint, that's one way to start to build that framework and network. And I just wanted to plug that because like go to your local bookstore or go on a large online retailer website and search for books that have health and wellness information or nutritional information and see, is there a common denominator in these publishers? How do I reach out to them? Play in the industry sandbox that's not just RD specific, but be the RD in the publishing space rather than amongst all the other RDs. Okay. Exactly. Had to just sort of plug that like very practical tip.
I love the practical tip.
Back to, sorry.
Contracts.
Contracts. Right.
You mentioned a couple things at the beginning. I think you differentiated the work for hire a bit, and to say that right here we're talking more about that traditional book deal. So what is a traditional book deal? How does an author get paid? What is that gonna look like? I guess what are some of the key elements?
Yeah, so in a traditional book contract, an author is offered what's called an advance, and it's an advance against royalties, or again, you have to earn back the advance amount in order to earn additional monies on your book. You never have to pay back your advance if it doesn't earn out. So that's a misconception. But a traditional book contract, you are offered an advance to write the book. It's not usually you would never want to actually calculate how many hours it takes you to write the book and then what you're paid. It barely comes out to a fair hourly, but we don't write books for hourly reasons. We write them for passion and helping people. And then you have a royalty structure in your contract, which outlines how much per book you earn. And every 6 months, your agent gets a royalty statement, hopefully with a royalty check, and then that's processed. If you work with an agent, it's a commission-based model. So it's a 15% commission off of the advance and royalties earned for the life of a book project. So for example, if your book deal is $20,000, you might, depending on your publisher, determines how that's paid out. The best payment structure is halves. It's very rare. Oftentimes it's thirds, quarters, sometimes even more than quarters in terms of how that $20,000 is paid out over a period of time. Oftentimes 2 years, maybe longer. So again, big, beautiful business card, not a retirement plan. Although not all book deals are $20,000. Some are $120,000 and everything in between. I've negotiated it all.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think that whole idea of a contract is a really scary thing when you haven't really been through that process before and really understanding, is this what it should be? And do you recommend if somebody is getting, let's say they're successful in proposing and they get, a contract, a deal back, having that reviewed, what are some of the, I guess, recommendations?
So an agent's job is to know the boilerplate expectations of the industry and negotiate in your best interest. So, our agency has contracts with all the publishers. So we know, the next contract with such and such publisher should reflect at least what we agreed to last time, if not improvements from there. But if you're approached and you don't have representation, You can consult representation as a one-off. You can approach agents and say, would you be willing to take me on? We are not lawyers. So, what a lawyer, and we recommend if you want to have a lawyer review your contract, that's fine. What a lawyer may pick out is from a publishing agreement is often different than what as agents we feel is most important or not, and we can put that in the context. So oftentimes, like, our clients may have a lawyer review something, and then we add and sort of overlay our agent recommendations on top of that, or explain to the lawyer why XYZ thing is or is not relevant in this scenario. So it really all depends. But just because you're offered a deal doesn't mean you have to say yes, and it doesn't mean you have to say no, right? I mean, everything is a negotiation.
Right. Yeah. I think you mentioned, working with a literary agent. You kind of mentioned the type of work that you do. And I know, you mentioned that very small percentage of, I guess the pitches that you're giving. So being represented by an agent, does, that increases the likelihood, obviously, that you're going to get, you're going to get published, right? But if you mentioned how difficult it is to get picked up, right, by an agent. So what are some of the things that you're looking for as an agent that you would be paying a second look, or from someone, like, what is it that really piques your interest and has you go, oh, I'm a little bit more interested in that person then? Is it sheer audience numbers or topic? I guess I'm curious.
Personally, it's not sheer audience numbers. Okay. You could line up a lot of other agents and they will say, yeah, it starts with platform. Okay. And they define it by audience numbers. We represent a lot of first-time authors with a variety of different platform sizes. So I can only speak to how I operate. But no, I don't just look for audience numbers. It goes back to the science and serendipity, right? Like, I want to see a beautiful proposal. I want to see somebody that's, like, really thoughtful about their pitch. I want to read language that shows me that you've taken the time to learn as much as you can about how to pitch in addition to what to pitch. Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that again, because there's so much information out there for free on, like, how this all works. Start there, right? I mean, immerse yourself in learning and absorbing, and then decide, do I want to maybe invest a little bit into learning more or not? So I want to read a great pitch. I want to read it, and I wanted to read like somebody knows what they're doing. What that looks like is short and sweet, specific, highlighting what needs to, the right stuff that needs to be highlighted, not the fluff of my idea is so great and I'm so wonderful and I'd be willing to go on the road and promote it. Like, that's a common pitfall, but it happens like all the time. Mm-hmm. And personally, I just need to be super interested in it. So I got a proposal, I think this was even just like a week ago, that was like a perfect proposal. I just wasn't interested in the topic. Okay, fine. And going back to what you said about, putting decks and pitches together for different, accelerator programs, how you learn from that feedback too. We pride ourselves on the rejections that we send because we spend time in the proposal highlighting where you can make improvements and how to stand out. And sometimes people come back a week later, 6 months later, 4 years later, saying, thanks for this feedback. Here's what I've gone and done, and here's where I'm at now. And that really stands out.
Yeah.
So, understanding that a no is full of opportunity and information just as much, if not more, than a yes is.
Yeah.
Is really important. And again, just like I need to be personally invested in the idea because I get really passionate about every project I pitch. And so if it's lingering in my inbox, I know, like, that's just a red flag for me that I'm not the right agent for you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point about, finding, honestly, the right agent too, someone who believes in what you want to bring to life as much as you want to, write that book. But I also think we just talked about, okay, you want to write a cookbook. And I think the reality is here, do you really have that passion to pitch and craft that proposal that ultimately, like, it's kind of like full stop, right? If you can't really pony up to really make that pitch and proposal, that idea, that message you want to put into the world, whether, you know, that cookbook can't really come to life. Maybe through a self-publishing route, but again, you're still going to have to sell that book. So I think you mentioned that whole idea of, it's like you can't put it down, that pitch. Like you have to. I remember so many, like, personally building, you know, my online platform, my marketplace of, I couldn't go to bed before 2 a.m. It was like I was possessed by this absolute insatiable need to make this thing happen. And I wasn't forcing myself to, and it was like sprints of work, but it like came from a place of, it's hard to describe. And I think that's what you're talking about, is that's how you should feel about your book proposal. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, don't just write it for the sake of writing, right? Like, you gotta want it, because nobody is gonna love it as much as you. And hopefully your agent will love it second most.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure people that want to learn more about you, and then also for you to tell us about, and you have a new course on you tell me it's about publishing a cookbook, right?
Yeah, so, you know, we get the same questions over and over again. We see the same red flags over and over again. And about a year and a half ago, 2 years now, what is time, really? We started holding workshops, teaching people information like this, but in a 8-hour session, right, in a much more comprehensive way. And out of that grew this desire to package that same kind of information so people can take it wherever they are in the world and at their own pace. So I feel like an author. I just published a course. It's called How to Write a Cookbook, and it walks you through all the stuff we've been talking about today and a lot more. So our proposal guidelines are a free resource on our website, and that's a great place to start. And then the course itself, really walks you through every single component of the proposal. Walks you through, do you need an agent? There's a fun little questionnaire that you can take to see if, an agent is the right thing for you. I give people examples of 3 different deals that we've done at the agency, what those financials are, what the royalties have been, how the payout is structured, so that you really see practical information about how this works. Because at our agency, whether or not we formally work with somebody or not, because we've been in business for 40 years, we really value being a resource. And so the transparency of how this works is important to me. If you want to get into this, or you think you want to get into this, immerse yourself in learning about it. Our course is an option. There are other courses that are options, but they're not from the agent perspective. And what's unique about the agent perspective is that I'm working with publishers across the board. So it's not just one author's experience with one publisher, maybe 2 publishers. It's my experience selling, hundreds of book deals to all the different publishers that are out there. My Facebook community is a place to ask questions, to learn from one another. I moderate it, I interject, but it's really a conversation among the members as well. And our agency in general, if you follow us on social, you'll see everything from a random picture of my daughter to other webinars and conversations like this, where people can continue to ask questions and just sort of dip their toe into, does exploring writing a book make sense for me now or in the future? And that's what the course is sort of to walk you through that when you're serious, to ask yourself, is now the right time?
Yeah. And I know in the post associated with this video, there is a link to Ekis Group's website, and right there you can see the cookbook link. And you mentioned How to Write a Cookbook as a Facebook group. And I know you really cool. I actually did look at that resource on proposals, the guidelines that
proposal
you have.
Guidelines, yeah.
It was super helpful. So I would definitely recommend. It kind of goes through all the things you should have and some of the things you were mentioning to have a quality proposal, so that you can start to test your idea out in a formal proposal.
There's a great podcast that just launched a couple months ago too, called Everything Cookbooks. And it's hosted by 4 different cookbook authors. So again, it's a slightly broader perspective than just one author's experience. And each episode is super specific, like a deep dive into each of the topics that my course covers and that, we've talked about here today: financials, editing, copy editing. I don't know if they have a episode about nutritional information. Anybody listening today might decide, I want to listen, and then DM them about next season. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I just really love the content they're putting out there. And again, that just launched a couple months ago. So again, there's just like a lot of great information to consume. And if you're serious about writing a cookbook, or you think you are, go listen, learn, have fun, give it a try.
I love it. This was really helpful, and I appreciate you coming and sharing your years of expertise on pitching and book publishing. I think
Thank you.
The RD audience, there are plenty of published authors, and as I look through some of the, you mentioned that one author perspective, and I think that's what I see as kind of the gap in some of these conversations is one person shares their experience, which may or may not be reflective of the broader, everybody's experience, as well as people tend to share when something is really good or really bad. So I think some of the spaces that you mentioned are a great place to get more of a broader look and dive into some of the key topics. So
yeah, I'd also like to just offer, if people, I don't know the fastest way to get in touch with me, but if you follow me on social, which is my name, Sally Ekus, EKUS, and you DM me, I'd be happy to send you my Calendly for just like a 15-minute conversation for people who maybe have heard just like that one skewed perspective of it was great and you should publish with my publisher, or holy cow, I had the worst experience ever and here's why, beware. I am a common denominator of all of those and everything in between, and I'd be happy to continue to be a resource and chat with anybody that's sort of in that unique scenario and offer maybe more questions than answers, but things to think about.
That would be terrific. So for those of you listening, definitely take Sally up on that. So thank you everyone for being on today in the RD2RD Live Show for May already. I can't believe we're staring summer right down in the face. And we'll be back in June, the second week of June, with our next edition. So thank you for being here today. And I see some great comments here. And definitely add in the comments if there was a topic that you said, I really wish that we could have spent more time talking about, whether that was pitching, proposals, literary agents, like all of it, of where to connect with other authors. Throw that in the comments so that we know there's always the opportunity for me to put out additional content on guides or blogs or other things where, can provide more resources. So definitely throw it in comments. That's always really helpful for me because I create these shows, I put out content that, is intended to be a resource and helpful. So much of your comments help to guide as I look at my content calendar of what you want. So thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you, Sally. All right, everyone. See you next month.